today has been, if I use the phrase shizzle show, might give you a little bit of an indicator of how things have gone today. Not particularly well. Chaos energy, absolute chaos energy, just things spiraling, falling, dropping, crashing, difficulty, late trains, pedestrians walking in front of cops, that kind of energy. It has been a very long day. Anyway, hey guys, hope you're okay and are having a really good and productive week. So what are we going to be talking about today? Today I have decided that we are going to be discussing all things decade related, and you might be wondering, what do I mean by decades? Well, I mean the actual labeling of decades. So for example, the 1990s were known as the 90s, the 1980s were known as the 80s, the 1970s were known as the 70s, so on and so forth. Like, you know, I think you get it. I don't need to be remedial about this. So I think we should bring it back. I think we should be embracing the fact that the eras that we live in should have a name, and that this is the 2020s and we should be calling it the 20s. I think that when kids are in their 30s, they'll be like, oh, do you remember when this used to be a thing in the 20s? I actually like that. I think we should bring it back, and I'm going to talk about why we kind of need it in our lives, you know, why this is kind of working for us. So basically it has a historical, it has a cultural, and it has a practical value in order to bring back the labeling of the decades, because let's face it, nobody wants to be saying the 2000s all the time. It sounds clunky, it sounds awkward, but equally, what do we call them? And you know, we're talking about Y2K a lot, and I mean, Y2K was a single year. Like, there was a lot of difference between the year 2000 and the year 2010, but actually defining the decade is something that we don't do, and I don't think we talk about this cultural kind of celebration of all things noughties. See what I did there? I brought a term in, and I'm going to talk about why we didn't use that term, and the Americans have something to do with that, because the Americans often have to do all the things that are a little bit not great at the moment. Right, okay, so why should we bring back decade labels? I mean, you might not agree with me on this, but I think it's worth it, okay? So first of all, think about the last century, and I know that the further we progress into this century, you know, people born in the last century and have a 19 in front of their sort of year of birth are going to become less and less frequent, aren't they? And so by that point, labeling the decades the way that we did in the 1900s or the 20th century, as we call it then, is kind of a good thing, isn't it? Because, like, you know, it helps us have a clearer value of time. Like, we know that the Roaring Twenties were like the Great Gatsby, and they were, you know, flapper girls, and there was, you know, perfumes and cocktails. We know the 1930s were about depression and, you know, those pre-war years and the last sort of golden era of freedom between the two world wars. The 60s were about, you know, liberation. They were about, you know, sexual freedom, hippies, free love, the Beatles, Twiggy. You get what I mean. You kind of get a sense of the mood, the fashion, the politics, the music, and the major historical events that happened in those decades. And it was easy to clearly define them because they were set 10 years with a clear identity where we kind of understood what the vibe or what the zeitgeist of that era was about. So yes, we love this. And then named decade becomes a bit of a container, doesn't it? You know, for a collective memory, a shared experience. And we all love those shared experiences, don't we? We all love having that sort of reference to something, and we don't kind of do it so much anymore. Like, in the 1960s, everybody is a bit like, oh, I remember where I was when, you know, the man landed on the moon, and oh, in the 1990s in the UK, like, I remember what I was doing when Princess Diana died. And, you know, in the noughties, everybody kind of remembers what they were doing when, you know, the Twin Towers were destroyed and, you know, the World Trade Centers were attacked by terrorists. So these are kind of things that we can all kind of remember, and we know that they happen in a specific decade. But I feel like recently we've kind of lost that. I mean, like, these big cultural events aren't even reported or shown in the same way as they used to be. It kind of like, because we're all like micro watching or reading or like consuming media on our devices at different times, we don't have that collective shared sense of audience or time frame. And I think that maybe bringing back decades would enable us to have those feelings again of, you know, being a bit more unified. So yeah, I think that's definitely a reason why we should bring it back. So cultural identity and shared memory, because it's all nice to have that. So another thing about the decades is the linguistic simplicity of it. So if you're not sure what I mean by that, I mean, it's just actually shorthand language, isn't it? Like, it's a bit clunky. What were you doing in the 2010s? Well, if I just said the tens, surely you know that I mean the 2010s. If I said the noughties, surely you know I mean like the year 2000 to 2009. You know, is that really that hard? Now, I know that I'm coming from a British perspective, you know, the clues in the title here, you know, quirky British female. So I know that the word, or the word naught actually might not exist outside of British English. So just to give you an example, 2 zeros would be noughts, 1 0 is a naught. So in English, British English, we have obviously 0. We also have O's, and we also have oughts, like, yeah. So that's a bit confusing. I've just realised that. So, you know, if I'm giving someone my telephone number, it might be 0736004. That isn't my number, don't worry. I would never be so stupid as to put my details very publicly out there on the internet for everybody to use, and for those little identity thieves and scammers to utilise and get all my details. So, saying the 20s is quicker, catchier, and far more elegant than saying the 2020s, okay? And I think we're all going to be defining this decade, because boy, has it been a fun one. Think about how it started. COVID-19, remember that? That was fun. And quarantine and vaccines and masking and political upheaval. I mean, we're in the middle of like several wars. I mean, it's only just halfway through this decade, and I feel like I have lived 1,000 decades in this decade. It has been absolutely crazy. I mean, you got to agree with me. What is going on? Can it calm down? Will we have a more peaceful and more sedentary next 5 years? Fingers crossed, that would be great. So yes, calling it the 20s is a lot quicker and a lot catchier, and definitely something that we would like to, you know, give ourselves a little linguistic shorthand there, because there's nothing wrong with, you know, abbreviating things. And because it's a bit of a linguistic shorthand, it's a decade, you know, that would be easy to write and share in the media. Now, I remember the 90s. I am so privileged. Like, anyone born after the year 2000, you missed out on the 90s. The 90s was so good, and I'll tell you why they were good. They were good because there was no freaking social media. You could literally be your own person. You could be left alone, and time went slower, and yeah, you could be bored, and that would be okay, and nobody knew what you were up to, because we didn't need to document every absolute moment of our life, and the photos we did take were more fun and more carefree. It was a good era. I'm very privileged to have been very young and teenagery in the 90s, and I feel bad that, you know, things aren't terrible now, but the 90s were a great decade. And don't get me wrong, things weren't always perfect, and there were sometimes problems, but it was fun, it was easy, it was more relaxed. And, you know, in 1997, I remember that just being a vibe of a year. Like, even now I look back fondly on 1997, that cool Britannia vibe, you know, Patsy and Liam on the cover of like Vanity Fair, and being invited in to like 10 Downing Street and hang out with Tony Blair, because after having like, I don't know, 16 years of, or 17 years Tory rule. We went to an era of optimism, which is kind of like the absolute opposite of what's happening now. There is no optimism. There's just really terrible politics and terrible leadership. So yeah, no wonder I'm going back to that. And I'm not saying that Tony Blair was a great leader or anything. I'm just saying that there was a feeling of enthusiasm and everybody kind of had politics, but it wasn't so polarized or divisive or like, I am going to die on this hill. People were willing to kind of be more objective and more centered. And anyway, that's a completely different topic and a completely different video. But as we say, I do like to go on deep dives and I do like to go on tangents, and that is an absolute tangent. So yeah, it helps. You know what? I absolutely lost that train of thought there, and this is going to be very messy editing, so I'm hoping you're looking forward to that. But in the 90s, that amazing decade that I just had a big, like, joyful reminisce about, you know, on my pencil case at school, I would write, like, 97, 98. And I don't mean, like, a 98. I mean, like, the number 9, the letter T, and 8, the number 98. Can we bring that back? Can we be like 2T5? Can we do that? That would be cool. Go on, young people. Go on, Gen Alpha, Gen Z. Let's embrace this. This is definitely what we want to do. Zelfies. Yeah, the Zelfies. You guys should do that. Absolutely. So what else? It's easy to kind of rebrand nostalgia and marketing. So I am at the point where my youth can be Halloween costumes. That's fun. And you know, you can dress up like Britney Spears, you know, hit me baby one more time. I'm never doing that again. That's another one of those things that I really shouldn't do videos, and yeah, I just keep trying to do them. So, you know, you could dress up with like your little pigtails. You could get the red cat suit as well. From the Oops I Did It Again video. You can sort of, probably even from the 10s, dress up as like, you know, a hipster with your flannel shirt, and your denim skirt, and like, you know, have, you know, your kind of early 2010s kind of vibes going on there. So we can kind of rebrand our culture and our marketing, and we can sort of reference the time period through the music and the things that were most exciting and interesting in that time. It also helps with historical continuity. Like, we understand how time pieces together, and we understand what kind of was shaping those eras. And we've been naming decades for over a century. Like, we did call the Roaring Twenties the 20s 100 years ago. That was clearly defined. There's no balance today. There's no balance. It's just all chaos. Chaos, chaos, chaos. I don't want chaos. I want not chaos. So, historical continuity, naming the decades over a century, and why did we stop? Because actually it helps us to connect the past and the present. It helps us to understand those key cornerstones of events and maybe what was influencing them. Like, if I said what was going on in 1963, I think we've got a good vibe. We understand the 60s. We can look back at it and we are aware of certain cultural cues that define that time period. And I think it gets a little bit murky and a bit mergy. I really do think the last 25 years have felt like one big start of the 21st century, and we haven't even bothered to kind of define it separately or as its own thing or its own identity, which, you know, isn't great. So those are like the 4 reasons why we should bring it back, and I hope you managed to pick those out from that very convoluted explanation that I've given. But why did we stop it? So why did we get to the year 2000? I was going to call the year 2000 to the year 2009 the noughties, and that meant naught. That means 0. I got naught on me. I've got nothing. That's what naught means, in case you weren't sure. But it didn't catch on globally. So it did not pick itself up and get referenced around, you know, the Western world or the English-speaking world. And it felt too British and unfamiliar. I'm sorry. The language you speak is a derivative of British English. It is a gift to every country that chooses to adopt it and speak its own beautiful, unique version. And you know what? You call it a faucet. Call it a faucet. You call it a sidewalk. You call those traffic light robots and talking to you, South Africa. I think that's pretty cool, actually. You create your own version of it, Shinglish, you know, Singaporean English. How cool is that? So yeah, I'm all for that, but equally, please feel free to adopt some of our words and reutilize them. There's nothing wrong with noughties. It's a great way of defining the first 10 years of the 21st century. It is infinitely better than the 2000s. I wish you knew how difficult filming this video has been. And I've been doing this for about 15 minutes now, and if it could go bad, I really do not like or enjoy the chaos energy. I'm going to do a bit about chaos energy, but it'll be a separate video. But chaos energy is chaotic and we don't like it. Stop with the chaos energy. There's a retrograde going on. It's all coming at us. No, glide away. Glide away. We don't want the chaos energy. Bye-bye. Right, let's go back. So, the noughties. Awkward, gimmicky, forced. No, I think it would have caught on quite quickly had people been more emphatic and people had chosen to use it. And yeah, so let's bring it back. We're going to bring it back. Let's just call it the aughts. You know, let's bring and call it the noughties. There's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. Okay. Numerical confusion, because calling the 2000s the aughts created visual and spoken ambiguity because it's too many oohs and too many zeros. Really, what was this big thing about the year 2000 and all the zeros? I know there was this thing about computer language and the zeros, and obviously the worry that all the nuclear bombs would go off in midnight of year 2000 because all of the computers didn't understand that the zeros were going to mean that the date had changed, and there was, you know, the Y2K effects, and we were really worried about this. But yeah, I think we took it too far by literally removing it from our dating system and our sequence of that. But actually the word ought, or the aughts, or, you know, that's an ought rather than zero, is kind of old-fashioned or archaic British language, and it isn't used that frequently in modern English. So I kind of get that. Okay, I'm gonna have to concede on this point. Maybe it was a little bit dated and we were embracing Y2K and we wanted something a little funky and fresh, but we never actually found anything. And now I think, yeah, let's just bring it back. Let's just call it the aughts. Media often defaulted to the clearer but clunkier 2000s or the early 2000s, and I feel like Y2K is the one that kind of is branded about a lot now. So now that we're in the 2020s, we can and we should call the decade the 20s again, because I don't think there are many people around today that really remember the 1920s. I mean, like, if you were born, I mean, Queen Elizabeth, who passed away a few years back, she was born in 1926, and I think she would be 100 next year. So anyone born in the 20s is now either over 100 or coming up to 100 years old. And I don't think there are many people in their 90s that are really going to remember the 1920s. You know, if they were born in them, it would maybe a little bit of it, but they're not going to be really remembering the pomp, ceremony, and the real zeitgeist of that era. So I do think we can happily call this decade the 20s. Let's do that. That'll be great. You know, there's already trends emerging that are going to be culturally defining, like our attitudes towards climate change, the dominance and presence of AI suddenly, the fact that we're working remotely or more hybrids, digital education, the impact of the pandemic, lots of social movements. You know, we've got feminism that seems to be, you know, the 4B movement, the male loneliness crisis, the self-inflicted male loneliness crisis, because let's face it, guys, go make some friends, go join a club, talk about your feelings. I'm sure we could resolve that issue if we really wanted to. And don't come at me. I'm raising a son. I'm married to a great guy, so I know about men. I have a dad. I'm surrounded by men, and they all seem to be functioning, living their best lives, and they don't seem to be suffering from male loneliness crisis. So exactly who are these men, and do they need some help? Can they ask for it? You know, maybe that's the way to solve that one. Anyway, I digress. The public appetite for narrative, meaning and cultural signposting has never been as crazy as it is now. We want labels, we want to be defined, we want to understand things in contexts that we relate to. So renaming decades is definitely something that would enable that in this fast-paced world that we are living in. So, in short, what do I want to say in this video? Because it's been very rambly. I'm not entirely sure it makes any sense, but we're going to go with it anyway because that's what we're doing. So we should bring back decade labeling because it creates cultural shorthand and identity and gives us a clear identity. And I think we need small, chunked decades, but compact, defined decades. 10 years is a clear 10-year reference rather than this weird 25-year milieu of randomness that's kind of hard to define. They make historical and social commentary and analysis way easier. We can really understand like Oasis are touring again, and we've all got that nostalgic vibe of the 90s and the music, the haircuts, the fashion, all these like late 30s, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds coming out of the woodwork who remembered the fun and the energy of the 90s and are reliving that through their Oasis experience. And finally, they're part of a long-standing linguistic tradition. We've done it for a century. Why did we let it go a bit hazy the last 2 decades? Not entirely sure, but now we can re-embrace it. We can bring it back. So yeah, I get it was a bit awkward, so, you know, early 2000s and the 2010s, we didn't really get it. But now that we're in the 2020s, we can go back to it with full swing, with zeal, with passion, with enthusiasm, because it's time to embrace tradition again. And we're all about a little bit of tradition, aren't we? You know, that's what I want to say. Right. I'm going to leave it there because I think this could be one of the randomest videos ever. I'd just like to say thank you to the camera for managing to stay up for the last 5 minutes of this video. That's been helpful. It's made this whole process much easier. Thank you for sharing my mind dump. I am definitely going to be doing a few more of these, and hopefully you'll enjoy my little crazy thought process here, or maybe you agree with me. Feel free to comment. What do you think? Do you like the 90s? Do you like the 60s? Do you like labeling the decades as actual decades, or do you actually think that we should abandon the whole thing and that really defining decades the way we do isn't really the best strategy? I mean, maybe you've got your thoughts. Please feel free to share with me. So I'll see you all later. Ta-ta for now. Bye bye.